Starting date, Monday, May 5th, 2008, at 1 hour 7 minutes and 17 seconds p.m.
Gaston County 911, what's the address, your emergency?
We are at Riverfront. Yes.
Okay, I'll just right now. But above the I-85 bridge on the water, there's like a power line that goes down there. I don't know how to get there by land, but the cars run down the embankment and the person's laying beside the car.
Okay. And when did this happen?
Huh?
When did it happen?
I don't know. I was on my jet ski and we saw it out there.
Okay.
I'm going to connect with Mecklenburg County.
It's at the end of Tuckasegee.
Okay. Hold on 1 second, okay?
You did not see it happen, though. Is the person male or female?
I can't see. I want to say it was female. We were still on the jet skis and we couldn't get right up to the car.
Okay, but did what, conscious or breathing, do you know?
Yeah, excuse me?
Were they conscious or breathing?
Either one. We had a jet skier pull up until they found a body floating in Catawba River.
It was just a solitary vehicle, though. It was just one.
Like a little blue Malibu, and the body's laying beside of it.
Well, I thought we were in Gaston County, but they transferred me to you.
I'm still on here, Mecklenburg. No, it looked like they tried to get out of the vehicle, and they were just laying right there beside
What she's asking you is what road is near there, the dead end of Tuckasegee? What road?
It was Tuckasegee, just run straight into it.
Excuse me?
Was there any bleeding that you could tell?
What road would I get on to get on that part of Tuckasegee? What's the closest road?
We took exit 27.
Okay, now, if they come to Dale Super Red, is there any way that, what you said you couldn't figure out how to get to it by land, right?
I don't know. It's like a power line where the underground power line runs across there. There's like a little dirt road up there, but I don't know how to get these things.
Where's the body at?
It's on the right-hand side of the river, about maybe a quarter of a mile down. We can see the jet skiers and everybody just going around it.
Dale Super Red?
And out there, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is it on the bank?
I don't know. They just came up and said there was a body floating in the
You're
river.
going to need a boat, probably.
Okay, well, they're going to call Belmont because they'll get to you first, but we're going to send fire department and EMS as well.
Okay.
And if anything changes or you find out anything else or somebody tells you something else, if you would, just call me back.
Floating in the river.
Okay, sir. We'll get them on down there at you, okay?
Thank you.
Thank
Ending
you.
date, Monday, May 5th, 2008, at 1 hour 12 minutes and 27 seconds p.m.
It was her student ID picture, and I just like started screaming. Sorry.
And he said, no, this isn't a mistake. They identified her. We collapsed and I was shaking. I was on the floor. It was the most haunting day. We would hear one of my parents cry, and this has been very, very hard.
Ask us girls disguised as women, with hearts full of longing, with bellies full of indecision. What is life worth to you? What is time worth to you?
Some photographs, one photograph, not some photographs, but pictures do not convey her charm. You know, sometimes there are people who are photogenic and you see a wonderful, beautiful person in the picture. She looks okay, but in life there was really something special about her. It's not like classic beauty, it's just something shining from within. and also this friendliness towards the world and other people.
Frailness?
Friendliness or
friendliness.
Affectionate attitude towards people she knows or she doesn't know. Maybe that's why the tragedy happened. Maybe she was trying to help someone who killed her. I don't know. But some kind of trusting attitude and readiness to help absolutely anyone.
I only hope that police can find this person responsible for that.
Ask us girls disguised as women, with hearts full of longing, with bellies full of indecision. What is life worth to you? What is time worth to you? What is life worth to you? What is time worth to you? With hearts full of longing, with bellies full of indecision. What is time worth to you?
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision still remains within the sound of silence. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly left its seeds while I was asleep, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.
You're talking about a university area. If something happened in that area, wouldn't you think that somebody would have seen her with somebody, or in a car, or get in a car at some point?
You would think so, yes. I don't know why this suicide thing ever come into play. Who commits a suicide, using the car or whatever, then steps about 5 feet from the car and lays down?
Right.
I don't even know where that would even come into play. Somebody laid her down after she was dead. Laid her down about 5 or 6 feet. I don't know the exact distance, but it laid her down near the car on the embankment there after she was dead. Is because they're so wrapped up emotionally into the crime and strangle her and whatever. What they do when they come out of that for just a second or two, then they're faced with not being discovered. And so what they do, they ram the car down there to try to get in and go down. So now they get away from the crime scene.
Okay, well, and I think we had mentioned before that
she was dumped on the bank of the river just like the car was. There's nothing really any special importance of her being particularly there on the bank of the river.
Okay, and you had I think initially.
It was Dr. Godwin who first agreed to assist in this reinvestigation. Holding a doctorate degree in the field of investigative psychology and crime scene analysis, he initially reviews the public information available online in order to profile a murderer. Keep in mind, his profile may change as he reviews photographs of the crime scene itself in later interviews.
Was the camera ever found?
The camera for the bank?
No, the camera that she had in her hand.
There was a camera in the car. They kind of made a big thing about it at the trial. There was some film missing out of it or something like that. I think when they kind of assumed that somebody ripped the film out of the camera, but which could be. But I've had other camera specialists look at that camera and indicate that that's not necessarily true. You can advance that knob without having film in it, and it wasn't conclusive to them that somebody actually ripped the film out after 2 exposures. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So but that was a big thing in the initial trial, and that's because they were saying that she was taking pictures down there, and she took a picture of something she wasn't supposed to, and somebody got really upset. And somebody, like, she had taken a picture of somebody doing something wrong, and they got highly upset and took the film out and killed her. What does that sound like to you?
Well, like I said, people kill you to get money for drugs. But right now, as far as what I can see and tell, and what I'm from reading and looking and seeing and everything, my profile says that this is a juvenile delinquent from age 16 to 21, very familiar with the area, lives within 3 to 4 miles in the area, and he hangs in the area, and he came across her in time and space. Just an opportunistic thing, and he took advantage of it and killed her. And his street smarts and stuff has allowed him to get by with this crime.
Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking at this point.
Well, along with the police help by them focused on Mark Carver.
And what do you mean by that? Their help in focusing on him?
Yeah, because the person who did this crime never had anything to really worry about, because the police has only ever focused on Mark Carver. I think they looked at 5 or 6 people before, but they eliminated them.
Yeah. Oh. Right.
I mean, Mark, talking about DNA, Mark Carver supposedly strangled this girl, and his DNA didn't appear any on the ligatures. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, his DNA was not on any of the ligatures that they found on his neck, on her neck. And I know Mark Carver didn't wear gloves.
Right.
So how in the world did he not leave his DNA somewhere else?
Somewhere else, and you wonder. There was some speculation about maybe there was some moisture. I don't know whether to some extent she may have been wet, so I don't know if that may have washed some away, and I'm not sure. There was also rumor that there was some unknown DNA that was under fingernails, and I think even some on the ligatures themselves, and whether or not that was ever preserved or can be tested or something like that, I'm not really sure, but it would certainly be interesting to find out.
But now, as far as you are concerned, or not concerned, but as far as you know, has a juvenile offender that I'm speaking about, has anyone like that ever been looked at in this case?
I haven't heard of a juvenile defender. I have not heard of a juvenile defender. Okay, so that's a new one on me. It seems like you're making that connection.
And I'm just telling you, the picture that I'm painting is the one that I'm leaning, unless I get something else that makes my mind shift another way.
Sure.
This is where I'm headed to.
Okay. That's your initial impressions, and until you see more and hear more and analyze more.
It was a quickie, done and out.
Right. Yeah, and that's what kind of perplexes me, is that if they were gonna, why they would take the extra time to pull the body out. You know what I mean? There's some sort of if the body was in the car, or
they had to drive it down there. They were trying to haphazardly get rid of the car.
Right.
But it didn't work because he hit that damn tree.
Gotcha. So they may have been taking the body out they may have been taking the body out to dump it in the river or send it downstream, or something like that, and they might have been interrupted by the jet skiers that were coming up river. I suppose that's one. I guess if we were following that theory just initially, that the car was supposed to go in the water and everything was supposed to disappear. If it didn't, now it's like, well, let's get the body in the river at least, or something like that. For various reasons. I mean, do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, he tried to keep her in the car and try to send her in the car in the river.
In the car. And
in the car, that's right.
And when that doesn't happen, they go to plan B, something.
And see, what starts happening now is panicking. The time seems to be speeding up a lot more when you're in a situation like that. So the best thing to do is just leave it all behind and just get out of there.
Right. And you would think so, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So it was if they were going to go to the extra step of doing something, then they.
But another thing you have to consider too is the bungee things that they were talking about, them coming out of the trunk.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to restrain a victim and use a car key to open a trunk and get those things out at the same time with just one person?
Right. So you're thinking it might have been two people.
Might have been two people
involved in that.
That's right.
That's interesting. Well, that sounds good. I really, we've got the initial impressions of what you've seen so far of the crime scene. I mean, I guess technically we don't know where the crime scene's at this point. Or,
I wouldn't put it past as a game.
okay. Okay. I thought that there was a certain amount of staging, and why would that be? I mean, that's part of it, I would presume. That
I've not seen the close up of any of the body.
Right.
See, I need to see close up of the body to make that kind of statement.
Okay. I understand, and then we should be getting some more photographs and stuff like that, so you can make that analysis. Okay.
But what I'm working on is, just like I did in that second podcast, in that second Washington State case, I reviewed what I had, developed the criminal profile, and it was spot on.
Right.
And that's what I'm going to do in this case too.
Okay, so you need the actual photographs of how she was positioned in relation to the car, how her body was laying, and that sort of thing.
Oh yes, I definitely need that.
I think we got more work to do. I've got more information to get in your direction so that you can, dig a little deeper. Okay. So I should be getting some more photographs within the next few weeks, and I'll be forwarding that to you, and you can give me your a more in-depth analysis based on that additional information. Okay.
Well, you take care now.
Okay, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Dogs are going to be barking. Dr. Maurice Godwin. Dr. Godwin.
Yeah, come on in, man.
How we doing?
All right. Good to see you. All right. Good to see you, man.
All right. How you feeling?
Been doing all right.
Yeah?
Yeah. We can sit and chat, and then we can go get something to eat later, okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Maybe what I should do is get my files and that sort of stuff, bring that in. Okay, let me get that.
Dr. Godwin's presented with the actual crime scene photographs for the first time. Ira's body lay awkwardly next to her car on the banks of the Catawba River. His trained eye studies the photographs for peculiarities. The position or positioning of her lifeless body is of particular interest to him. Interpreting the scene reveals the behavior, the conduct of the perpetrator during the commission of the crime, and assists him in constructing the criminal profile. His preliminary review of the case gave him the impression that the perpetrator was juvenile, 16 to 21 years old, and living within 3 to 5 miles of where Ira's body was found. Their paths, he stated, crossed in space and time. Now, armed with the crime scene photographs, one has to wonder, will Dr. Godwin's criminal profile change based upon this new information? Before answering that question, a review of what's been uncovered so far in this reinvestigation is in order. First, recall that given the remoteness of the area where Ira's body was found, and the fact that the news reports conflicted on Ira's timeline up by the campus area that morning, it was critical from the ground and in the air to be able to pinpoint where exactly Ira's body was found on the banks of the Catawba River and where exactly the fishermen were located. In earlier episodes, Fedora traveled down to the river and identified these locations and were able to pinpoint them on a map. Follow the link Ira and the Fisherman in the podcast description and on the website. Knowing precisely where Ira and the Fisherman were on the river that day means that an accurate measurement of the distance between them can now be made. Fedora's producer vowed to provide that measurement by midnight tonight. And lastly, Ira's final footsteps, her timeline up by the campus area that fateful morning, has been closely studied. Few things are more important than the timeline when trying to solve a mystery. Recall that local media outlets reported contradictory versions of Ira's timeline as the story was unfolding, for some strange reason. Some media reports indicated Ira traveled directly to the Goodwill Donation Center right after the bank, then finally the coffee shop, while others reported her leaving the bank and driving next to the coffee shop before finally stopping at the Goodwill. Those reports came from established media outlets here in Charlotte, so why the contradictions? In previous episodes, a clue was left in an attempt to answer that very question.
This video is to represent the timeline for Miss Irina Yarmolenko.
It's a video made by lead investigator Detective Terry. He's narrating his own video. You can view this video following the clues link. As the camera rolls, Detective Terry's holding up his phone. The date and time displayed Friday, September 24, 10:17 a.m., 4 months after Ira's body was discovered. The clock on his dashboard reads 10:17 as well. Looking out his windshield, we see Chancellor's Place Drive in front of him, curving up the hill and out of view. The bank's sign directly in front of him, with the rear of his vehicle pointing towards University City Boulevard. Then in the very next scene, he's driving down the road. We know he's tracing Ira's timeline, so the question is, what road is he on? What direction is he headed? And more importantly, where's he stopping next? The trees on the side of the road cast their shadows across the street. And we know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But at mid-morning, the sun's in the southern sky, meaning casting shadows point northward towards Detective Terry's left. That can only mean one thing. He's driving down the road heading east. Now that we know what direction he's headed, the next question is, what road is he on? We know he's driving to either the Goodwill or the coffee shop next. By studying the campus area maps, one finds there's only one road that connects the Goodwill, the coffee shop, and the bank, and that's University City Boulevard. So now we know he's heading east on University City Boulevard. But a most important question, where is he headed next? The coffee shop or the Goodwill? If we follow the detective coming from the bank, there's only one way to exit from there, and that's by making a right turn onto University City Boulevard. He's then heading west on University, not east. But from there, it doesn't matter where he's going next, either the coffee shop or the Goodwill, because in either case, he has to move on over into the left lane until he comes to a turnaround in the middle of the road. At that turnaround, if he's going to the coffee shop next, he'd simply make a left directly into the shopping area where the coffee shop was located. But if instead he's next traveling to the Goodwill, he'd have to make a U-turn at the turnaround. Then, and only then, after making that U-turn, can he then be traveling east on University City Boulevard, heading squarely in the direction of the Goodwill Donation Center. So there we have it. He's driving east on University City Boulevard. He must have made the U-turn. So his next stop is the Goodwill. Now that shows that in September, 4 months after Ira's lifeless body was discovered, when Detective Terry was making this video, he apparently believes that Ira's timeline was the bank first, then the Goodwill, then finally the coffee shop. That can be confirmed as well because in the very next scene, his car's in front of the coffee shop. He continues with his narration.
It takes approximately 5 minutes and 50 seconds to drive to Jackson's Java from Goodwill.
The statement itself indicates that from the bank he next traveled to the Goodwill and then took the 6 minutes to drive from the Goodwill back down to the coffee shop. We also know his theory of the timeline because when he arrives at the coffee shop, the clock on his dashboard reads 10:32, which was 15 minutes after starting out from the bank at 10:17. 6 minutes of that 15 minutes, as he just announced, was spent traveling from the Goodwill to the coffee shop. Logically then, it must have taken him approximately the same time to go first from the bank to the Goodwill, since, after all, the coffee shop and the bank are directly across the street from each other. We also know from surveillance video that Ira spent 2 minutes at the Goodwill making donations. Thus, from the 15 minutes subtract the 6 minutes Detective Terry just reported, going from the Goodwill to the coffee shop, then subtract the 2 minutes, the time we know Ira spent at the Goodwill, and we're left with 7 minutes. The time it must have taken Detective Terry to travel the first leg of his trip from the bank to the Goodwill. To wit, all seems fair in love and war. 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 Review the image entitled Turnaround Island, following the clues link. Now, by studying the detective's video a little bit closer, we observe some important points, as well as some contradictions and some inconsistencies. First of all, why make this video in September, some 4 months after the tragedy? Was it literally just to represent her timeline as stated in the beginning? Because if so, why not just record himself driving her timeline routes? Why the need to time it all over again in September, if it already proven it previously? By timing the routes in September while making the video, it seems he's trying to work through the timeline mystery and trying to figure it out, which suggests that in September, 4 months after Ira's lifeless body was discovered, police were still not sure of her timeline up by the campus area that morning. Then there's the inconsistencies. Detective Terry starts his recording at 10:17 a.m. up by the bank, but Ira's at the bank counter at 10:22, according to the bank surveillance video. She'd need another couple minutes to get into her car and drive off, which means she's leaving the bank no earlier than 10:24. So, why start the video at 10:17? It's possible he did wait there at the bank several more minutes before leaving, closer to 10:24, but if he did, why not show that in the video, if attempting to, quote, represent her timeline? Remember also that he's back in front of the coffee shop at 10:32, according to the clock on his dashboard, reporting to have just taken 6 minutes to have driven from the Goodwill to the coffee shop. So if he did wait and leave at the bank closer to 10:24, the approximate time that we know Ira left, and then he arrives back in front of the coffee shop at 10:32, 8 minutes later, it would have meant he would have had to have driven the first half of the trip from the bank to the Goodwill, then the second half of his trip from the Goodwill to the coffee shop, all in the span of 8 minutes, when it just reported that the second half of his trip took him 6 minutes, leaving only 2 minutes to travel the first half of his trip from the bank to the Goodwill. A practical impossibility. And if one factors in the 2 minutes we know Ira spent at the Goodwill, he would have had to have traveled from the bank to the Goodwill in 0 minutes. A clear impossibility. That brings us to the obvious conclusion that when making this video, Detective Terry would have had to have left the bank several minutes earlier than the time that we know Ira likely did, which is again odd if he's, quote, representing her timeline. The video is problematic in another way too. Again, he's in front of the coffee shop 10:32, explaining he just traveled there from the Goodwill. But we have in our possession, and certainly he did too, the video of Ira arriving at the Goodwill at 10:33, several miles and several minutes away. So the time he's in front of the coffee shop just doesn't add up. In summary, the start and stop times in the video are inconsistent when compared to the time-stamped images of Ira at the bank and the Goodwill that morning. And it's possible that because of these inconsistencies, there's no summary or conclusion at the end of the video. One would expect a summary of the facts, summarizing all of the travel times just recorded and reconciling those travel times to the time-stamped images of Ira at the bank and the Goodwill, where we know exactly what time she was there. So it's odd that a final summary and reconciliation is not presented. One has to ask, could that have been intentional? Is it possible that Detective Terry knew Ira's timeline all along, and that this video was merely a means of providing deliberate misinformation to the public? Police will often withhold relevant facts from the public in an investigation in order to identify an individual as the true perpetrator, who later confesses to the crime and who can also reveal facts previously known only to the detectives. That's certainly possible here, but it seems unlikely since, in regards to Ira's timeline, the only unknown was in which order she made her last 2 stops. So a misinformation strategy would seem to be somewhat ineffective in this case. Further, if misinformation was the intent, why bother making a video in the first place? Media outlets could have simply been fed the misinformation directly. It's also possible that this video was simply Detective Terry's preliminary work product, showing a record of his attempt to figure out her timeline, as opposed to literally trying to represent it. That's certainly possible, and it may have been only after completing the video that he did realize that the facts just didn't fit. If that's the case, the question remains, why initially start the video recording at 10:17 at the bank when we know Ira left there closer to 10:24? Certainly he would have known that as well. It's more likely than not that early on in the investigation, detectives encountered most of the same set of facts encountered by Fedora's producers, which were as follows. Time-stamped images of Ira at the bank counter, the latest of which was 10:22. A time-stamped video of Ira arriving at the Goodwill Donation Center at 10:33, driving off 2 minutes later. Then detectives receive a tip that Ira had been to the coffee shop that morning. They follow up. Was there a surveillance video? The answer, no. They interviewed the employee working there at the time in an attempt to narrow down the timeline, but the employee couldn't recall exactly what time Ira stopped by. When pressed, she guesses 10:20, maybe 10:30, 10:40. She wasn't sure. Detectives could have then started timing the various routes, but ran into the same problem Fedora did, and that was, even though it was known what times Ira was at the bank and at the Goodwill, that wasn't sufficient to solve the timeline mystery. And that's because the driving times along University City Boulevard could vary so widely depending on the traffic and the number of stoplights involved. Remember, the timeline mystery was, in essence, what time was Ira at the coffee shop? It's because the employee wasn't certain exactly what time Ira came in that set the whole timeline mystery in motion in the first place. If she was certain about the time, there would have been no timeline mystery at all. There would have been no need for Detective Terry to make the video, and there would have been no conflicting media reports on Ira's timeline either. It's not surprising the employee couldn't recall exactly what time Ira stopped in because, after all, Ira showed up unannounced and was there for just a couple minutes. We know that from the interview with the shop's owner. With that kind of backdrop, one can understand how conflicting media reports were generated. The media's source of information was obviously the police. Who else could they have got it from? Detectives were certainly trying to figure out Ira's timeline early on, but as has been pointed out, figuring out the timeline was problematic, given the set of facts they had to work with. The police could have been changing their minds on a daily basis as the investigation progressed, so it's understandable that reporters talking to the police on Monday, the day of the tragedy, could have gotten a completely different timeline than reporters inquiring on Wednesday, only days later. We also note something else about Ira's interaction with the employee at the coffee shop that morning. Ira was not clear about where she was going next, or where she'd just come from. She certainly didn't say, "I've just come from the bank," or "I'm off to the Goodwill now," or "Now I'm going to the river to take pictures of kayakers," because if she had been explicit, those statements as well could have solved the timeline mystery. It seems odd for Ira to have talked to the employee and not to have at least mentioned her closely proximate comings and goings at all. However, in an earlier episode, we heard from the shop's owner who wasn't there at the time, but who certainly spoke to the employee later, and he seemed to be under the impression that Ira had indicated she'd just finished a final and was heading back to Chapel Hill to be with family. It was finals week, and it was known that Ira was transferring from UNC Charlotte to Chapel Hill after the semester. So that all made sense, but for Ira to have made no mention at all of either where she'd immediately come from or where she was going next seems a little odd. But then again, She did kind of seem to be in a hurry, visiting the coffee shop for just a couple minutes, so it may not be that unusual after all, but it still seems noteworthy for some peculiar reason. Finally, it's also probably not unreasonable to conclude that even to this very day, the mystery surrounding Ira's timeline up around the campus area that morning has never been conclusively and factually resolved. After all, as we've seen, if Detective Terry hadn't solved the timeline mystery in September, when this video was made, 4 months after the fact, what other facts could have possibly arisen afterwards? Certainly none that have ever been reported. And keep in mind as well, at a certain point in the investigation, police were focused on the fishermen. The theory of the case became the following. After being seen up in the campus area that morning, Ira headed across town to take pictures of kayakers on the Catawba River. The Olympic time trials were taking place at the time. Ira did photography for the school newspaper and had mentioned to a colleague that she wanted to take some shots of kayakers on the river. So she drives to the river to take photos. But there she startled the fishermen who were apparently engaged in some sort of illegal activity. The fishermen, seeing Ira with the camera, thought they'd been discovered. So they accosted Ira, strangled her, and then tried to hide their crime by pushing her car into the river. Their plans were foiled when the front of the car became lodged and stuck on the riverbanks. That was the theory in the prosecution's case. Ira met her killers, the theory goes, near the banks of the Catawba River. So eventually her timeline up around the campus that morning soon had nothing to do with that theory. It simply became irrelevant to the case. Why expend the effort and resources trying to figure out a timeline up by the campus area when that's ultimately irrelevant to your theory of the case? So now we can reflect anew on the detective's September video. If it wasn't deliberate misinformation, and it wasn't the detective's preliminary work product trying to figure the timeline out, and Detective Terry must have certainly known at the time that he made it that it didn't solve the timeline mystery, why make the video in the first place? The answer that seems to make sense is that it may have been made just to have something in the file regarding Ira's timeline. Even if it didn't actually solve the timeline mystery, and even if a careful review of it would have revealed its flaws, better to at least have something in the file. After all, the timeline was now irrelevant to the case, so who would be interested in carefully reviewing it anyway?
Check. 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 Check.
sat for a moment to take it all in. I'd studied the maps. I'd followed her footsteps. I've obtained the pictures with the timestamps. And now I'm here. I can look up, and from helicopter pictures I can tell you the path that her car took. To my right and just through the woods, about 180 feet, was Mark Carver's pickup, parked along the river. It's been a long day, but now the mystery's over. I know exactly where her car went down and where her body was found lying. The three paths, the right-of-ways that went down to the river, I know which one she wound up down by. I know where Mark Carver was. I have to admit it's a little bit spooky being down here, but I had to follow the trail. I had to find the answers. Some questions answered, other questions raised. I felt like I reached a plateau, a place upon which to meditate. It's been a while. Property here has changed a little bit, but the layout's basically the same. I don't know. But it's time to head back up.
Tonight the moon casts its light, creating shadows where I walk. In the whisper of a graceful breeze, only the rustling trees still talk. Dodging ivory beams that glow like bright rain over dark night, the black corners have summoned me to capture this looming sight. Amid these deep hollows, no sign is left. Have I wandered into black tombs? Old truths lying close? I'm but a shadow of the moon. 180 feet.
Dr. Godwin.
Yeah, come on in, man.
How we doing?
All right.
Good to see you.
All right. Good to see you, man.
All right. How you feeling?
Been doing all right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We can set a chat and then we can go get something to eat later, okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Maybe what I should do is get my files and that sort of stuff, bring that in. Okay, let me get that.